bitterness to me is like, it's at times it's still there, but it's a little bit quieter. And I'm like, okay, I can't stay here forever. At some point, I want to think about, okay, what do we do now? Like, what do we actually do to build something more beautiful than whatever we had that was back there? Oh man, this will be a fun episode. It's Noah. It's been a long time, dude.
Dude, I was thinking about it tonight, like how long it's been since we podcasted together, and honestly, I think it was like January.
Oh
so
my
time
gosh.
time is flying right now. I don't know what's happening, but it's good to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so it's good to have you back on the podcast, Noah. I mean, you are the podcast producer, so you're behind the scenes every week with me getting episodes out. And for a while, you and I were probably podcasting together at least once every other week at a minimum.
Just about,
yeah. And then you had to become an adult and get like a real job.
So lame, right?
Yeah,
I'm on like a boring 9-to-5 schedule, like all the people I didn't want to be growing up. But
that's hilarious.
But it's good for me. It's fun. I'm loving it. So
no, I'm glad to hear it, dude. It's crazy too because, my schedule is so different now. Like I try and reserve night times just to kind of rest, but honestly, like it's been so long since we've talked, and I feel like people really enjoyed our conversations because it's just so different, right, dude? Like it's so much more casual, it's so much more chill. It's not like I'm interviewing a guest. It's like you and I are co-hosting around a conversation. So I'm glad to do this again, and hopefully we can find ways to do them a little bit more often, even if it's a little bit later on at night, because I don't know, I miss this part of the podcast conversation personally.
For sure. Yeah. It's nice to be able to decompress and just kind of talk through things out loud together and think thoughts and get feedback from friends in the community. And it's, I'm excited to be doing this again.
Well, I also want to apologize, friends, that my voice sounds a little hoarse. I've had like some kind of throat thing going on for now close to a week, and I have this tickle in my throat I just can't get rid of. So if I sound a little hoarse, it's from all my coughing. So I apologize. And it's also later on at night when my voice is kind of fatigued. But that being said, I did want to start off. No, I had a funny story that you as a musician are going to understand and get.
Okay.
And if you're out there in the audience and you're a musician, you will be able to resonate with me. So I was playing a gig last week. I was playing at this venue in North Jersey. And the way that it works for you out there who are not musicians, the common thing to do when you play live is you put headphones in. And these headphones give you the ability to hear yourself and to hear the other band members. And we also use a metronome live. So there's a click track in my ears, and we use loops. So using in-ears, they're called in-ear monitors, IEMs. They're very important. They're essential to have when you're playing, especially as the drummer, because you have to keep the band in time. So sometimes, if the singer or the bass player are having some kind of problem with like their in-ears or their connection goes out, they can just follow me because I'm tied to that click. So I preface it with all of this. So I get to my gig. Our setup is really late because there was a band before us. So we pretty much finished setting up 5 minutes before we have to start playing an hour-long set.
Oh,
okay?
wow.
Yeah, it was
that's rough.
Frankly, it was a shit show.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, right? So we're all set up. I put my ears in, and I hit play because we're just going. And I'm hearing static. I'm hearing static. I'm hearing crackling in my right ear. And I'm like, uh-oh. And I'm thinking to myself, did my right in-ear just go? Now, I use what's called molds. So that means that I have had these in-ear monitors custom tailored to fit my ear. That way they also cut out all the outside sound, so it protects my hearing. So they're pretty reliable. So I'm like, I don't think it's the actual earpiece. My cable went. And by the third song, I had no right side. Just gone. Gone. And
that's horrifying.
Oh, especially as the drummer, because we're on click and loop. So many of our songs need the loops because we're only a 3-piece or a 4-piece. Yep. So luckily my left was fine. So for the whole night, I played with just my left in-ear working with the metronome, and I pretty much took out everything except for the click, some bass, and like the lead vocal, and just had to suffer with that for a whole 2.5 hour long set.
That's horrifying. That's like my worst nightmare, because my band plays to tracks too, and it's how we all stay in sync with each other, because we have, again, same thing, we're small band, but we have a lot of layers, and as the drummer, that's got to be That's got to be something
dude,
else.
And imagine like you've already started the song and you're just finding out the problem now.
Well, that's the kind of thing you want to figure out before a sound check. But if you don't have time, if you're like rushing up there.
Exactly.
Wow. That's sort of like that video that went around for a while where it was like Polyphia. It was one of these metal bands where the tracks went out. Everybody should look up this video, even if you're not a musician, because the tech comes out and starts tapping the drummer's leg with a drumstick so he can keep time with the tracks. It's wild.
You do whatever you got to do, but I'll tell you what, I was panicking. And of course, I did not have a backup cable. So the cable detaches from the in-ears. So I bought one the other day. It should be in any day. Wow. So, and I bought two just in case. But yeah, that was my story.
You're going to be paranoid like me and start bringing like 3 sets of in-ears to every gig just in case.
Oh, you're right. No, you're right.
I'm that person. I've got a whole backpack of like copies of everything.
Well, I do bring extra drum heads because the thought of breaking a snare drum head just freaks me out. And it's happened once. So thank God I had one like ready to go. But yeah, I mean, backups, you never think about them until you need them. And then if you don't have one, you kick yourself in the ass for not having that backup, you know?
Well, that's just what happens when you build your drum house on shifting sand. That was funnier in my head. That didn't work so well. It's fine. I won't edit it. Oh my God,
I'm dying. Oh man. All right. So anyway, I mean, I figured that would be a funny story to catch up with you, Noah, and maybe the audience out there that there are days where things just go completely down the shitter and you're trying to play a live set and you're like, oh my God, I have another hour long, nonstop set to play before I can even break. And dude, at one point in the set, I took tape and tried to duct tape the wire to my neck to have it like hold in place. It didn't work. No. So,
had that ever happened to you in the church world? Because I know you played the tracks there as well, right?
We definitely played the tracks there. Okay. There was one thing so I have one story about that. So I was doing this multi-church worship thing I was a part of for a while, and we had like our big, I think it was our 4-year or 5-year celebration. So we planned this massive like intro. It was like a video was going to play. The band was going to hop on stage and like play with the video. And then we go like right into the first song. So it's a big event. My heart is racing. And I put my ears in and we have no ears. None. No. We're just all muted. And none of the band has the ears. So
what's it, the monitor guy?
I don't know. I'm like, what do we do? So I just go for it. And of course, it totally tanks. Like it totally tanks. And the worship guy stops in front of everyone.
Oh, no.
I feel mortified. It turned out, this is a really technical term, but the Dante connection, that's like a networking term that essentially connects everything to the board. That connection had a problem. And so it just killed all of our ears. So that happened to me before. And also one time, our church fog machine set off the fire alarm during our Easter service.
What? Did you have to evacuate?
We did not. They were able to like let the sheriff or whoever know. I think because like the sheriff like went to the church, so he was there, so he saw what happened.
Yeah.
But it was our second service. Again, a big deal, big production, and the fog machine set off the alarm. And I remember seeing these flashes in the back. I'm like, oh, is someone taking pictures? No, it's the fire alarm. So that was fun.
Wow, that's wild.
Oh man.
I'm a master of transitions, Tim, if you didn't know.
Oh, are we transitioning?
Because I wanted to talk about church. Do you want to talk about church?
Yeah. I'm in, dude.
Okay. Yeah. So you made an Instagram whatever. You were talking on the stories a few weeks ago about the idea of church and thinking about going back. I mean, for both of us, it's been I think we both left at a really similar time. It was the same summer. So 2 years, something like that now.
Yeah, my last time in church was April of 2 years ago, so 2021.
Okay, and for me, it would have been August of 2 years ago that I left my job at a church. So yeah, I was really interested in the conversation that you and the community were having over the stories about the idea of like, do I go back? What's next? Feeling like there's something there that I'm missing, but I'm not sure how to pursue that. And I would love to talk about that. I'm really curious to hear more of your thoughts about where you're at. And I mean, I have a lot of thoughts too, but I'll let you talk first.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Yeah. This is tied to a bigger thought in my head. I've been doing this work now. Let's see. We started TNE. Let's see, December 2020. I was still serving at my church at that time. April of 2021, they gave me the ultimatum to either stay with them and keep volunteering or to stop doing the work that we're doing now. So I left. That was like the last time I was kind of ever part of a church officially. And And this like deconstruction thing that I think we've all experienced in some ways. It definitely, like anything in life, has phases, I feel like, and I don't think,
Yeah.
I think if everyone stayed where they were 2 years ago, where they are compared to where they are now, I'm not really sure if that's like the point, or I'm not even sure if that's what's supposed to happen, right? And that's broadly speaking, that's just life, period. I mean, we've said since the beginning, Noah, that life is progression, which would
Yeah.
mean that even our beliefs are always evolving and changing, right? So you have this moment where you're really deconstructing things, you're really seriously rethinking things, and you're also no longer accepting the evangelical answers that you were given. And so you're like kind of free to explore and really reinterpret your memories at church through like a different lens, right?
Yeah.
So when my church gave me the ultimatum, I was gutted. I was really heartbroken. I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay there. This work was too important at the time, and I'm glad, because this work has become now my livelihood and my passion. And I get to meet people like you and other folks, right? And we get to do this stuff. But it was painful, right? Like I lost this sense of community and like feeling like I'm a part of something with people doing quote unquote kingdom work. And I really had no desire to go back to church. And I think deep down, I always knew maybe one day I would be opened up to going back, but I just needed some time. Plus, like many in the audience and like Noah, I've been in church my whole life, faithfully serving, right? Like I'm one of those always there people. So I took some time off and kind of went through like my own theological renewal, maybe. And I'm not arrived. I'm still in progress myself, but I feel like I have a better grasp of some newer beliefs now than maybe when I did a year or two ago. And to be honest, I love doing this work, but I also believe in being in proximity to people. And frankly, this work is isolating at times. It can just feel lonely. Like I'm in my office all day by myself, right? Talking to people through the internet, which is better than nothing. I mean, I will take it. But no, you and I know, like when you and I traveled to theology beer camp last year, right? Like we became closer friends. And then when we road trip down to Nashville with Mike, we became friends. Like there's something about proximity. And so I think there's that part that I miss. Like I just kind of miss people in proximity to me. And I also, if I'm being really honest with you, I don't have a solution for this. When I visited North Point, that's Andy Stanley's church, I saw the band play. I was like, shit, I miss this. I'm not sure if I can ever go back and do it. I'm not sure if I ever will go back and do it. But I miss it. I miss being there early. I miss playing with the band. I miss the worship music. I play in a cover band now. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. But I still miss like those other arrangements, the big builds. Like it's different. So I don't know. I've been thinking like I just think I'm open more than ever to try and find a community of people that we could call a church that I could maybe get a little more involved with. Obviously, I have different requirements. I have different things that I can't capitulate on or compromise on. But I'm just kind of in that spot where I'm like, if I can make it work, I'm kind of open to exploring this again. I'm kind of open to hearing maybe a teaching or even singing some songs. But more importantly, I'm looking to meet up with some people and just have some people in my life that are kind of like-minded that I can share this part of my life with. That's kind of where I'm at right now, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I'm kind of in a similar place, funnily enough. That's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because, when I was coming out of the job at the evangelical church that I was working at, I had a lot of feelings of resentment, a lot of hesitancy of the idea of church at all anymore. I was at a point where I was very committed to following Jesus, but the way that had presented itself in my life through church, and Sunday morning services and volunteering. I mean, I was volunteering since the age of, 11. Like I was the kid that didn't want to just sit there in Sunday school. I would rather be, co-teaching the class one younger than me. Like I wanted to participate. I was all in. I was in early every morning, multiple churches, youth groups, worship teams, the whole deal. And I think that in a lot of ways I was just burned out too, because I've been doing this thing for so long without any sense of rest. And combined with those feelings of resentment and betrayal coming out of that community, and feeling like there wasn't space for some of my questions and some of my own changing beliefs and convictions about what it meant to follow Jesus. And the beer camp was huge for me because that was one of the very few times that I stepped into a church building in years. Other than a few, honestly, pretty negative experiences when I had tried to force myself back in a time when I honestly wasn't ready for it. Mm. And it gave me this sense of possibility that there's something there that maybe I hadn't considered. And I think it was helpful that the format of that church, and we didn't go to a traditional service there. We were just in the building, but even that was really significant for me at the time. And it was a very different sort of church. It's a Lutheran church that was much more liturgical. Yeah. There was no stage for a worship band. And even, as someone that grew up in music and was formed through worship music and Christian music culture, that turned me into the musician I am today. And it's such a huge part of my life. But working in music production in church, I even had a lot of hesitancy about that idea of, there's nostalgia for me. Like you said, there's this idea of like, this was so much fun and it was so meaningful to do that with this community of people. But I have a lot of hesitancy of the way that I felt like that music was affecting people in a way that I wasn't quite sure if I liked what I was participating in. And so many mixed feelings. I'm kind of getting off track here, but that experience at beer camp really challenged my categories of, maybe there's something here. And I've been really thankful to find local community with close friends of mine, actually, I grew up with, who are also going through this same process of questioning. And we have a lot of shared things in common. I've made a lot of friends in my local community over this deconstruction journey. But I'm finding myself in a little bit of a different position than they are, where I think that I'm really happy to see them doing so well in a space that is entirely separate from the religious tradition that they grew up in. But that's not really the place that I'm in. And so there's this interesting balance of I've found this community, and in a lot of ways I've experienced a more fulfilling version of church now, talking to my atheist friends on an every other day basis than I feel like I really got when I was in those spaces. But at the same time, there's this draw for me of finding that local community that shares my fascination with and desire to follow after Jesus. And I think I'm in this place right now where I'm just hopeful. I think that it's possible, and I have has my own ideas of the Bible and what Jesus's good news actually was have changed. My idea of what I would want to look for in a church has really radically changed. And I've got a lot of clarifications of things I wouldn't be comfortable with sitting in again. But I think there's potential there. And that's kind of an exciting but also confusing place to be in.
Let me ask you this. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this. What kind of church would you want to go back to? Like if we're going to be consumers for a minute and build your own church, I mean, like, what kind of church are you looking to be involved with style-wise?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a tough question, because my most positive experiences with churches in the past few years have been heavily liturgical. And I think that as I've just kind of grown to learn and sit better with parts of myself and the way that my own brain works and responds to stimulus. I'm a very not neurotypical person. I realized that the evangelical structure of church, with the lights, the entertainment, the loud noises, these kind of things really make it much more difficult for me to have a meaningful experience of contemplation in those spaces. And I've had experiences where I've attended a few Catholic masses and other liturgical services where I just end up crying in the middle of the service, because it's the most spiritually fulfilling and meaningful thing I think I've encountered in a while, because it creates the kind of pause and structure and the repetition of the liturgy, things that I was very adverse to growing up, that I've realized are very helpful to me in this moment. And actually, in a lot of ways, I feel much closer to God in those types of spaces and those forms of worship. But at the same time, I have this evangelical heritage that I've had a lot of meaningful memories in too. Like I love playing in a worship band. I miss that. And in the same way, like I feel like I would sort of want to go back to that. But then there's hesitancy. I have mixed feelings about some of the ways that music influenced people. And I'm not always sure that was a positive thing.
Yeah.
And so there's some tension there. And I think I'm open to exploring a lot of different options, but it's definitely difficult. And I know that you've mentioned this and other friends of mine have mentioned this, that typically the churches that would be more receptive to the questions that I'm asking and the deconstruction journey tend to not have those evangelical service elements. They tend to be the much more liturgical churches. And so I'm open to that. But, even for a lot of friends of mine that are considering going back to church, and these are more people I talk to on the internet, that's difficult to find something that also fits the style of worship that they still find very meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, I'll put it this way: my brain's formed already, and it's been wired to modern evangelical CCM music, and I'm just used to that, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been in liturgical spaces, and I don't think they're wrong or unhelpful. In fact, they're beautiful in their own way, and there's something almost magical about being connected to words that people are saying at the same time as you around the world. And also that are ancient and that are rooted in not just 10 years, but thousands of years in some cases, of church tradition. I think that's really beautiful. Also, the modern evangelical church formed me, right? And I'm much more comfortable with that style of service. But like you said, Noah, most of those churches that I know of are not affirming. They are pretty much fundamentalism in disguise, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there is the post-evangelical collective that's kind of coming up, which is Zach Lambert and some other folks kind of doing this almost like denomination style, but it's centered around 4 or 5 core values that are very progressive leaning. But they're also more modern in church form, so they don't look so liturgical or so mainline. I'm oh, that sounds pretty cool. I'm interested in seeing what that looks like,
Yeah.
But also at the same time, is megachurch even a healthy biblical idea?
Right.
And I don't use the term biblical. Sorry, friends, to trigger you. I don't mean that in the sense of the fundamentalists. I just mean it if we're going to try and be ethical about the structures that we form again, even if a church was, inclusive and more progressive in their theology, is the form of that mega church or just that event-centered thing that revolves around a pastor preaching and modern worship, is it healthy even if the theology behind it is healthier? I don't have an answer to that question. I'm just telling you how I think about it, right? If we're going to really critique capitalism, is it weird to then be using capitalist structures to have millions of dollars of equipment on a stage for a full production so you can sing Hillsong tunes? Because Hillsong, as we all know, is so problematic. I would feel weird now singing their songs at this point. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I'm not even sure if that's just me projecting my own comfort on this church idea so I can feel more appeased, when in reality the whole thing is just so hollow that even with a slightly different theology or a more progressive take, it's still not beneficial.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely a gray area in between there too. I tend to be the type of person that jumps to a black and white category there. And I think when it comes to, I don't think there's any form of musical expression that's wrong. It's not that a full band, playing this style of music, there's anything wrong with that or anything anything spiritually unhealthy about that. I think it can be really beautiful, and I've experienced that as really fulfilling and beautiful in my own life. But there's structures in the context. I think the way that they're presented in the flow of a service can be spiritually harmful depending on how that's approached. And my experience of a lot of those spaces, and this is probably sort of the fear that I'm speaking out of when I have hesitancy to go back to that, is that there tends to be this, we see the success in the sense of, oh, more people are coming, more people are donating because the music's good. And then all of your good intentions sort of become measured by this new standard of how many people can we get in the door, rather than how are we encouraging people to be fully formed and spiritually healthy individuals, and keeping that musical expression within that framework. And so I think that's my own personal tension that I struggle with when I go into those spaces now, because I have this inherent concern that that's happening behind the scenes, even if I don't know about it.
Well, here's another question for you. I mean, what's the purpose of a church if it's not to save souls from hell?
Oh, well, probably the descent into liberal Marxism, I guess.
That's it. Yes. Yeah, no, that's
okay.
right. Yeah.
Glad we cleared that up.
But you know what I'm saying? Also, why would I be going? And like, what would the outpouring of that church be? Because again, what's our context, right? No one without Jesus. We must save souls for Jesus. They don't burn in hell forever. Well, if that is not the driving force anymore of like, okay, if I don't proselytize to you, you're going to burn in hell forever. What is the mission of that church? Like, what does it mean to evangelize, or what does it mean to have good news? What does it mean to, even convert people? Is that even a healthy way of talking about that? Right? Is it about conversion? Right. Is that a bad thing? I mean, I don't know. Right? Like, and there's all kinds of tensions there for me as well.
I think it's interesting because growing up, I grew up in a community that was very biased against particularly the liturgical church spaces, more based on denomination than anything else. There was this negativity around them because they weren't evangelizing the right way. Sort of like what you said, like they weren't doing enough to get people to pray a prayer. They were more focused about the people within their community than they were about getting everybody else in the doors of the church.
Yeah.
And that was presented as a really negative thing to me. And I'm not sure anymore that I see it that way. And I'm not trying to draw a broad black and white between two different approaches, because I think there's a lot of gray and nuance in between. But prioritizing the health of that community as fully formed, embodied people seems more important to me than a success marker of, oh, look how many people are in the doors. And I think that some of that does come down to the kind of gospel that church is preaching and what it's prioritizing there. Because if it's prioritizing, like you said, the saving of souls, like how many people can we get to sign the piece of paper or get baptized, right, or join the church membership, or whatever that success marker is, that's very numerically driven. If that's not the success marker and something else is, what is that? And right, for me, when I think about that, what I would want to look for in a church, I don't know. I'm going to try not to take this into a total theological rabbit hole, but I really feel like I got half of the gospel growing up. And I don't say that as someone that went to a lot of churches that didn't take serious theology and study seriously. I mean, like I was homeschooled and I read R.C. Sproul books as like my curriculum, and I read Martin Luther for fun on the side. So it has nothing to do with not having spent enough time in the Bible or anything like that. But the way that the way that following Jesus was presented to me had so much more to do with this set of beliefs that I had to subscribe to. And it was this personal relationship with Jesus was the phrase, in a way that sort of, I think we lost the corporate element of Jesus's good news. And when I go back and I read the Gospels now, I see the most explicit description where Jesus actually says what his gospel good news is. It's the freedom of the oppressed and the year of Jubilee and sight to the blind and help for the poor. And it's this incredibly communal idea of organizing around this kingdom of God. That's the other phrase when you read anywhere in the Gospels when Jesus is preaching the gospel, it's the gospel of the kingdom, right? And it's this idea of participation in a community that's bringing heaven to earth with the way that we combat oppression and we uplift the marginalized. And I think that whole aspect of the gospel was kind of pushed aside. And it was the very Jewish aspects of the gospel, honestly, because that's the heartbeat of the whole Jewish scriptures of the Old Testament, is how we're caring for people in this life. And that's a reflection of our own relationship with God as individuals, but also as a community. And I think that a lot of that was stripped away for this sort of John 3:16 faith and an interpretation of that, I guess, where it was all just believing the right things so you don't perish. And that meant, believing that Jesus rose from the dead, died for your sins, and now you'll go to heaven when you die. And morality is sort of just that thing you do because you owe God a favor because he did you a solid. It wasn't so much about how do we actually prioritize caring for the least of these in our community for the sake of, for life's sake, flourishing just for the beauty of it, as participation in heaven coming to earth, rather than it's all going to burn anyway. So we kind of had this negative impression of how we prioritized caring for people. in
Yeah,
that
I mean,
way.
I gotta be honest. I tend to agree. Like more and more, I'm convinced. I'm like, this whole like over spiritualization of a very physical gospel,
Yeah.
right? Of a very physical way of being, of embodying. I mean, Jesus is God incarnate. That's what Christians believe. Like it is deity. That he was fully God, fully man. That's like the classic Christian belief. That's a very physical thing, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't that like Jesus was like all physically a human and spiritually God. We believe it was like it was incarnate. And I do think too, like more and more, especially as I'm reading like evangelical history, there there's a lot of threads that we could unpack. I won't for sake of time, but it's just very evident to me that at least this idea of believe now so you don't burn forever later on is like a really hyper inflated view of definitely I think some theology that you could trace back for a long time, but it's like it's at the expense of meeting the physical needs of people, right? Or like you said, fighting for liberation or whatever it would be. And I just feel like it's kind of such a cop out, I think, for people
Yeah.
because it's like, oh, well, even though we can't prove it and we really don't know, we're saving you in the long term. So maybe your life is shitty now, but don't worry, one day you're gonna be
Right.
floating on the clouds. And it's like that's a really first off, arrogant thing to assume that you definitely know, objectively speaking, is what's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
Contingent upon you praying a prayer that, by the way, has really been invented over the past like couple hundred years or so
Right.
in the modern Western European context. This idea that you just ask Jesus into your heart to forgive you of your sins, a personal relationship with Jesus. That's not like an ancient way of thinking about the Christian
No.
tradition. I'm sorry, it's just not. So not only that, but it's new. And then that's the excuse for, well, it's the poor we're always gonna have among us. Like they take that one freaking verse, right, out of its context as
Yeah.
justification for, well, we can't do anything about it anyway. So might as well just get those poor people to have their souls saved from the depths of hell. And I just think the more I'm reading, the more I'm listening, the more I'm understanding the heartbeat of like the New Testament letters, let alone the Jewish tradition, and also the breadth of the Christian tradition in its complexity, and also the plight of people in our day today who are marginalized. I'm like, I think the focus is much more about being in solidarity with those people and fighting for their liberation. I mean, God in the Exodus story, one of the key central story of the Torah that the Jewish people still reference and think about today, and that the Black tradition used to keep their spirits up when they were enslaved by white people, right? Is the Exodus story when the Jewish people are liberated from their oppressor, and God drowns him. That's kind of violent for me personally. I'm just saying. But like
A little extreme, maybe. No.
God took a side.
Yeah.
Right? God takes sides, at least in the scripture. God judges Israel for neglecting their poor and for oppressing their poor and not welcoming the foreigner. These are themes that are all throughout scripture. So there's obviously, even in the scripture, a very clear thread of how we treat people matters. How we fight for equity matters. These are not Marxist terms, right? They're not quote unquote wokeism terms or woke terms. Like they go back to ancient, biblical ideas. And also, might I add, the idea of oppressing people is not new either, right? Like there's all kinds of ways that humanity has figured out to keep some people under the thumb of others. And so I agree with you, Noah. And, kind of bring it back full circle. I think for me, I would need a church that their theology was guided by that. That like,
Yeah.
hey, we have the choice every day to bring heaven on earth or hell on earth. As humans who are embodying the divine, who are reflecting the Imago Dei, right? We have a choice to be part of that kingdom or be part of the cycle of chaos. It's important that we partner with the way of the kingdom as much as possible in our local area, our community, our church, our individual lives, our neighborhoods, etc. That to me has got to be like the heartbeat of what drives us out of our love for Christ. Not this idea that, oh, if we can just get that poor person who can't pay their mortgage because of the, capitalist industrial complex that has essentially exploited their labor for their gain. If we could just get that person to not go to hell, we've really done it.
Right.
You
Well, and,
know?
and I'm hearing like the objection of maybe like former me who is, actively involved in the church saying, but we do so many, there were so many good things we were doing in the community. And I think that that's true. And I do want to acknowledge that for my tradition that we did, that several of the churches I was involved with did do a good job of trying to care for the people in their local community. But there was always this, I don't think our motives were the best, to be honest with you, because the emphasis on caring for them really ultimately had less to do with their well-being in this life than it did about creating a positive impression on them that might bring them into the doors of the church. And so I think that the motivation for that was just completely backwards.
Well, also it's an individualistic approach to a corporate problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Like evangelicals have no problem being corporate when it comes to abortion, for example. Right.
Sure.
They fought like hell to have the Supreme Court literally overturn a Supreme Court decision. Right. There's not that same kind of fervor to eradicate poverty by those same people. And what they'll do is they deflect to, oh, well, we have a food pantry. That's not cutting it. Like, look at the numbers. The rich are getting richer. The poor are getting either stagnant or poorer, especially when you account for inflation. Debt is through the roof. Medical debt is huge. And you think that a food pantry is really making a dent in the problem.
Yeah.
The dam is broken and you're putting a finger in one of the holes. It's like, dude, like you need it's a systemic reform.
Yeah.
And why aren't Christians that fired up about those things? Like how they are about gay marriage, for example, right?
Sure.
And that's kind of my point to that.
Well, and there's this weird kind of, I was taught to be afraid of looking for solutions in systems entirely. That was a negative thing. And I see that now when I read, the work of Christian Dumais and other historians, that this is a part of our evangelical tradition, weaponizing politics, really in ways that I think are contrary to the way of Jesus. But that's a long tangent for another day. But the whole Old Testament story is rooted in a people as a collective organizing their systems around forms of justice to build a better world here and now. And no, I don't think that we should use the Old Testament as the authority on how we build our systems today. But the idea that that is somehow unbiblical, or that there's something wrong with saying, hey, maybe there's something systemically here that needs to change, is just very anti-Jewish, frankly. It goes against this whole tradition that formed us in so many different ways.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop ranting.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm with you there. I think that, and that's something that would be important to me in a church that I look for, embodying that message of embodied life to the fullest and liberation for those that can't experience that we're fighting that they do. And that has a social and a political dimension, and I think that we were afraid of that in a lot of the evangelical tradition. And I just don't see it that way anymore.
Well, I'm not sure if they were afraid more than they wanted to use it for their own political gain and purpose. Like evangelicals have not had a problem being political since like the late 70s, early 80s, fair. Right?
Yeah.
But like, what are they advocating for? I mean, we've covered this extensively, but Trump is maybe the easiest example of a group of people betraying their own ethics, morals, values, everything for the sake of, oh, well, this guy will give us political power and make the country quote unquote Christian again, which is, code for white and conservative and evangelical again. Right. And so to me, it's like, it's not so much about, that they're afraid to, it's just what they advocate for, to me, increasingly seems to be more and more antichrist in nature. Even the abortion conversation, like they, and I'm speaking broadly, but the policies that pro-life groups advocate for very rarely is access to contraception, which would greatly reduce unplanned pregnancies, like greatly. Or, hey, if we could have fair wages for mothers, and if there was affordable childcare in this country for single moms, maybe that would lower rates. No. It's
Yeah.
not that. It's just we're going to outlaw
The-
abortion and
The
deal
things
with
that
it.
we actually have statistical evidence to say, hey, this actually makes a positive difference towards
Exactly.
the proclaimed goals of the movement.
And by the way, like 90% of all abortions happen like before 12 weeks. Okay. Like it's like 1% happen in the third trimester. They're incredibly rare. And by the way, I'm all for, especially in the third trimester, you know, like, yeah, I don't think someone could just walk into a hospital at like week 40 and say, hey, I'm bored. Let's just go ahead and abort. I'm not saying it has to be completely unregulated, but my point is that there are so many proven ways to minimize unplanned pregnancies that could lead to abortions that still keep abortion on the table for those who might actually need it. And instead, the evangelical response is, well, God says, according to us, that sex outside of marriage is wrong, so we can't support immorality. So we're not going to support easier access to contraceptives. People just need to be more abstinent. It's like, dude, like you can't have your cake and eat it too. We live in a pluralistic society with 300 million people inside of it. And for you to stop other people from gaining access to affordable contraceptions that would actually reduce the amount of abortions that you claim, you know, is a modern day Holocaust, which is a terrible talking point. It just, to me, it shows that you're not that pragmatic. It's not really, maybe it's not really about what you claim it is. So anyway, I'll stop ranting now.
Oh, I love it. It's that connection to power again, that the solutions are looked for by, you know, legislating morality through the power of empire, frankly.
And now, do you think, oh, God, I'll get you off.
No, I was just going to say that I find it so antithetical to the way of Jesus to seek for answers in power over people through violence. I mean, that's the Pax Romana. That's literally the logic of Rome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I think what some people might say is, well, you just want power so you can enact your will, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that the reality is power is a thing, power is a tool, and we have to be careful, right? When we advocate for things politically, right? We have to make sure that, okay, what are we actually advocating for? Who benefits from the policies that we're advocating for? Universal health care benefits a lot of people, not just white conservative evangelicals, right? A livable wage benefits a lot of people, not just white conservative evangelicals. So I think too, like it's not always about, well, power is necessarily bad. I mean, governments exist, governments have power, and we want governments to do good. It's how we're using that power and who is benefiting from that power that I think makes a huge difference. And I know we got here, but Christian nationalism, broadly speaking, mainly advocates for power for itself at the expense of its neighbors. You know, I think the kind of Jesus power that we see embodied through Jesus is that Jesus had all the power in the world and gave it away. Right. Like he let the empire take him, and he defeats the power of the cross by making it a spectacle, right? And then by conquering it by rising again. So there are ways to handle power, and there are ways not to handle power. And I think that we can look at the Gospels and see, you know, ways to and ways not to.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you clarified that too. So because I don't want to be misunderstood there either. That I think that it's a negative thing that we communally orient towards things that are life giving and help other people. I think that's incredibly important, and I think that maybe that's the difference maker is if we determine that those policies or those ways of orienting as a society actually promote well-being for all people or not, or just for the people on top that all look and think like us and want the same things as us.
I totally agree. Well, listen, as you can hear, my voice is dying quickly. Sorry, you'll have to edit this part out. No, I'm coughing like a maniac here. But I do want to say before we wrap up, we are going back to Theology Beer Camp.
Yes, I'm so excited.
We're going back, friends. Listen, if you're a new listener, Theology Beer Camp is hosted by Trip Fuller. Trip is great. It's an amazing event. It's happening in Missouri on October 19th. If you're a beer person, it's great. If you're not a beer person like me, it's still great because you get to hang out with amazing podcasts, amazing scholars, and really think about these things way more deeply than Noah and I could ever think about them, frankly,
Very
right?
true.
I mean, we actually podcasted last time at beer camp, you and me, like in our bedroom, and we're like, my God, my mind is totally blown. So I mean this. I recommend getting tickets. You can get them at the link in our show notes, but we're actually helping Trip kind of like plan the event. And he told me that he wants the event to have people who are maybe exvangelical or deconstructing in mind to help them think about better paths forward in the Christian tradition. scholars like Pete Enns, Adam Clark. Who else is coming that I can announce? They're two of the big ones. There's a few other ones.
Mason's coming back. I saw a couple announcement posts.
Oh, Dan Koch is coming back. You have remission. So like, it's really a great time. I'm also working on a few other podcasts that I can't announce yet because they're not secured. But when I can announce them, you'll be thrilled. I'm just telling you, it's a great time. You'll get to hang out with me and Noah, a bunch of people. Again, we get to be in proximity to each other, right, and hang out. So make sure you get tickets. Links in our bio, etc. It's going to be a good time. But I mean, Noah, any final thoughts on this conversation before we kind of wrap it up?
I'm curious to hear more from the community of your experiences of searching for churches this way. I mean, the responses on Instagram were great. Maybe I'll spend some time after we upload this in the Facebook group. People want to share their experiences there.
Yes.
I think I'm at a point right now where the bitterness has faded a little bit, and I'm sort of just hopeful.
Yes.
And so I don't want to say much more than that, but I think it's possible there's something out there that's better than what I've experienced, and I'm trying to be more receptive to that. And that
I don't feel
me.
like my bitterness is the loudest voice in my head anymore.
Ooh.
Does that make sense?
I really like that. Yeah.
Like, I'm still pretty angry at like the state of evangelicalism, but even how I think about my anger is different now, right? Like it motivates me in a different way. And bitterness to me is like, it's at times it's still there, but it's a little bit quieter. And I'm like, okay, I can't stay here forever. At some point, I want to think about, okay, what do we do now? Like, what do we actually do to build something more beautiful than whatever we had that was back there? And I think, for the record, I think anger and like even being pissed off and bitter is kind of part of that process for people. Yeah. So if you're there, do what you got to do. I understand it completely. I just think, go ahead.
Well, and I would say too, and if you're in a position where that's not an option for you, and you don't think it'll ever be an option for you, by no means are we advocating that you have to go back to those spaces either.
Right.
Because I have friends that are flourishing more, and I've known them their whole lives, and they're happier and healthier than ever. And I would never encourage them to step back into that either. But
a very key caveat.
For me personally, yeah.
Right. Yes, we are not here to tell you to start, quote unquote, reconstructing how we're doing it. Well, as we always say, Noah, transparency and honesty are so key to what we do. So I think it's important for you and I and other folks who are part of the work just to tell people where we're at, because that honestly, it does shape how TNE like does stuff, right? Like how we're thinking shapes the organization. Obviously, we're never going to push that people need to go back to church. Like I totally get why many folks, the ones that I know as well, have no interest in going back ever again. I just think for me, like, it's such a part of who I am. It's built me, frankly. And at this point, with that voice a little bit quieter and my perspective a little more like, okay, what do we build now? Right? How do we imagine better ways forward? I think those ideas have kind of gotten me to a place where I'm like, I'm open to seeing what else is out there in the church world.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better.
Sweet. Friends, thanks for hanging out. If you have any thoughts on this, shoot us a DM. I'd love to hear your feedback. And Noah, it was so good, man. So good catching up.
This was great. Yeah, we got to do this more often again. Yeah,
we do.
We'll make it work.
All right, folks, good talking to you. Don't forget, link in our show notes to get those tickets to Theology Beer Camp, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Deuces. See you soon.